Well, he wants to be entrepreneurial in his new role, and we'll see how successful he's going to be, or we'll get the outline at least. That's just about what every lieutenant governor wants to be, since there's no real prescription other than a couple of basic things in the Constitution for a lieutenant governor. But Dan McKee has earned himself the role of lieutenant governor by winning handily in the election. And although he was here a couple of times prior to the election, we haven't seen him since. So we'll congratulate him and find out what he's thinking along lieutenant gubernatorial elect lines tonight. Great to have you in. Thanks for watching Dan York's State of Mind for a Monday evening. Let's go to the rundown and see what we've got here. Yeah, this is a heartbreaker again. We've got a former lieutenant governor that found her way and now has a heck of a gig. Interesting comment by the junior senator on Newsmakers this weekend that I think we ought to hone in on just a little bit. And this is just a continued mystery to me as to why we don't fight for our own right to afford our own cars. It is that day, December 7th, and of course I want to hear what you have to say on your state of mind. Let's dig in. So much to do, so little time to do it on this half-hour broadcast. It's a failed rescue, and it's another disappointment and another family crushed and a victim of this terrorist behavior. The headline here, U.S. hostage killed during failed rescue attempt in Yemen, and the Secretary of Defense talks about the effort to go get photojournalist Luke Summers.
He was murdered during an attempt by American forces to rescue him from terrorist groups in Yemen.
It was the second time in 2 weeks American commandos had attempted to rescue Summers. The first had failed because he was moved shortly before the raid. The second because the SEALs lost the all-important element of surprise.
You know, there's no way to talk about this nonchalantly. This is a young man whose life should never have been taken. At least we tried. I mean, is that where we are now? Well, they didn't just behead him and we didn't do anything. At least we tried. I don't know what the answers are. I just know that he was warned that he should get out of there, and he didn't. His call, but it should have ended that way. Next item. Yeah, so Elizabeth Roberts is going to stick around. The Providence Journal reports that she's been tapped as the Secretary for Health and Human Services. She is, by the way, our lieutenant governor, and the governor-elect told us why she's going to hire Liz Roberts.
She happens to be one of the smartest people I know as it relates to healthcare, the delivery system, and she's shown time and time again a willingness and ability to be innovative.
And she is. I mean, she is. I think Liz Roberts, albeit a very liberal political player, which seems to play well here in the state of Rhode Island anyway, but I think she's an earnest public servant. I really do. And she turned that lieutenant governor role into kind of a, you know, a health thing, and now she's Health and Human Service Secretary. So she was able to turn that entrepreneurial lieutenant governor thing into a nice gig. I'm not guessing that's what she was planning on doing, but sometimes everything falls into place. The Health and Human Service Secretary outgoing is Steve Constantino, the former chairman of House Finance, who's partly responsible for 38 studios and has never been held accountable for 38 studios publicly. The Chafee administration never has, and so perhaps he's lost some of his governmental cover now. It'll be very interesting to see what the follow-up is with him. But congratulations to Liz Roberts. We'll see how she does. New item. This was really interesting. Did you see this on Newsmakers? You didn't miss Newsmakers. It's a must-watch over the weekend. Senator Whitehouse was on there, and they were talking about, Ted and Tim were talking about how weak the governorship is, and Whitehouse begged to differ. Listen.
You've got a governor who's motivated, who's willing to engage, who's willing to use the different levers of power and budget and bully pulpit that the governor has. You can get an immense amount done, and you can run circles around the General Assembly. And so
Not that you're advising her to run circles around your fellow Democrats.
No, but I think it's important that we set the bar high. And I think Rhode Island has kind of lost its vision of what a really powerful and effective governor can look like. And I'm hoping that Gina brings that back.
I don't know why the fellows suggested that they shouldn't be running circles around the General Assembly. Kind of put the senator back on his heels there. I would like to see a governor run circles around the General Assembly. It's time. But one of the tools that we do need, despite the bully pulpit speech there that Senator Whitehouse is making, is that we need a line item veto for the governor. And so here's what I say. I say the junior senator ought to use some of his gravitas and start arguing for a line item veto, something that was maybe possible in a constitutional convention that the voters, for some confounded reason, bypassed this particular last November. But let's see the senator looking for a strong governor start speaking publicly about, in state government, the need for a line item veto. He can weigh in. He can weigh in. I'd like to see him weigh in. Wouldn't you like to see him weigh in? Next item. Oh, gosh. So on Friday, they had this meeting, WPRI.com story. You should read it. Yeah, they didn't hear much. They don't ever hear much. They actually can't do much. This is the most dysfunctional thing I've seen in Rhode Island government. It's a competition, of course. There's lots of dysfunctional things. But the Vehicle Value Commission met last Friday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Who can make a public meeting at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the administration building? But you'd like to, because the list is, 50 miles long of the number of people who are taxed on vehicles that are way too valuable tax-wise, and you couldn't get near that kind of dough for it if you try to sell it on the street. Rob Cody is like the lone fighter, the car tax revolt guy. He talked to Eyewitness News.
When they tell you that your car's worth $6,000 and they tax you on $6,000, and then you take that car to the dealer and you want to trade it in, and they say it's worth $1,500, or if you want to sell it outright and you sell it for $1,700, there's a big difference.
We are certainly open to any legislative inroad to correct what they see as a problem.
This board is built to be ridiculously bogus. It's just embarrassing. We need a hero. Maybe McKee will do it, because he did a good job on education funding reform. Maybe I can get him to harness this one in his new role. Somebody's got to be the hero. All we have to do is copy Massachusetts. That's it. Massachusetts has a very uniform, fair way to do business when it comes to the car tax. We're all over Kingdom Come. You can't figure out what the value of a car is. Every town is different in terms of the tax rate. It is a confounding mess. Of course, that reform came in the early 80s in Massachusetts as part of the Proposition 2.5 initiative petition, where folks voted that mandate in. It was a package. And guess what? The world was going to come to an end in Massachusetts until it worked. It's right. I mean, half this audience is in Massachusetts. Will you please tell my Rhode Island audience that all we have to do is what you're doing? Finally, it's that day. I mean, you just can't experience December 7th without paying homage. People are still migrating back out to Pearl Harbor. Veterans who served in the greatest generation in World War II are still heading out there, and that's real footage. That was holy hell. And it's amazing. 9/11 and Pearl Harbor are probably the two most devastating days in our history. And when we were attacked on 9/11, we said it was the worst attack we've ever experienced since Pearl Harbor. Just don't forget about it. Simply said. Your state of mind, we'd love to hear what you have to think. Dial us at 228-1886, email, Facebook, tweet. Here's a voicemail.
I love the show. I find it extremely informative. Great cast of guests that come on the show, a wide array of great issues. Dan, I like your new glasses, and I can't understand why you always wear a solid colored shirt. Just don't you own a shirt that has stripes on it? Thanks, man. Have a good night.
I have plenty of shirts with stripes. But guess what? In TV, they tell you it doesn't look good on the screen. Blows up the cameras or something. Maybe I'll come in with a striped shirt someday. Just have a fit. The engineers will come running in, and I'll say, well, Paul wanted it. Dan McKee, next. Stay with us. I'm sitting here with McKee, and we're having a fight already about vehicle values. I was going to congratulate him about winning the election. There were scenes from the election, of course, that we keep around. There's a happy guy talking about all his plans and all that kind of stuff. There's Catherine Taylor, who he handily beat in this election, the Republicans. So My friend, congratulations.
Thanks, Dan.
The new Lieutenant Governor-elect. How's it feel?
It feels good. I'm looking forward to engaging.
The vehicle value thing, since we almost had a little informal debate on it here, we'll talk about it in a second, but did you note that Lieutenant Governor Roberts is now going to be the Health and Human Services Secretary? Interesting that she was able to kind of carve her niche in that role in the healthcare thing in terms of the Health and Human Services Secretary, which I think is probably pretty cool. It goes to show that you never know where this Lieutenant Governor's role is going to end up, right?
Absolutely, and I think it's a good choice to have.
She's a sharp person, and she's earnest.
The governor there. I think that she is. She's very, very smart, and she's certainly engaged in that space. And heaven knows we need to contain the cost and health insurance and keep the the level of service high.
Now you, coming from the mayoralty, all your campaign strategies and promises and plans talked about taking your experience from the mayoralty and applying it here and being kind of a liaison between communities, the mayors, which have kind of, I think, established themselves in a pretty instrumental platform level here. The mayors have risen together. You've been kind of part of that dugout. So that's part of what you're going to do, right?
Absolutely. I've already made the call, so part of the quote transition committee, which sometimes is a lot of fluff, but I intend to use it as a workstation. So one part of it is about 7 mayors, Balacina and Lombardi and Joe Alman and Paulette Hamilton and others, Bill Murray, who's going to be your mayor in Cumberland, my mayor, along with Senator DePalma and Representative Phillips, who co-chair a regionalization consolidation joint committee at the General Assembly. So we're going to get right into work in terms of consolidating and regionalizing initially public safety dispatch, which is one of their priorities. It's also one of the priorities of the leaders in the municipalities.
I don't want to get on a big tangent, but I'd like you to take on this vehicle value thing. I mean, you're not inexperienced in this. You, probably a lot of people don't know how instrumental you were in the education funding being reevaluated and reset, correct?
Absolutely.
So why the heck can't we get some uniformity in terms of how we pay taxes on cars, get rid of the differential rates, and fix this thing?
I don't think that, and you put up the spreadsheet on the vehicles. I think I know more about the inequities, both in terms of the allocation of the state funds into the cities and towns relative to the phase out, and in addition to an idea of, like you've been throwing around Massachusetts, which is one rate for the communities. And it makes a lot of sense. And taxing based on adequate value is as long as you provide the cities and towns the flexibility to decide their own destiny relative to revenues that they need to keep delivering the services that they need.
Well, that's a lot of words. I don't care if we choke the towns a little bit. I do think we
that doesn't work.
No, but here's
Governor Kacheri did that.
He did.
And he pushed a lot of communities into bad shapes.
What is wrong? Finish my sentence.
Okay, go ahead.
Choke the towns a little bit, but rearrange the funding mechanisms to make sure somehow the taxpayers have got to get a break, and they've got to be treated fairly. That needs to be the principle. And then what you have to do to make up for needs has to follow as part of the package. Now look, the car taxes weren't changed in Massachusetts without a Prop 2.5. That was the big. That was the big to do. I think the whole package has got to be looked at. I think you'd be in a wheelhouse to be able to suggest what the plan ought to be.
Our town has had a cap rate for over 10 years, 2 years before the General Assembly started phasing its tax cap in. So we've already had that, and we're already seeing over a decade of time in our community the impact of that on the growth of our budgets and the growth of our taxes. The vehicle issue is a very important one, but you need to look at both valuation, the way that it's the rate it's taxed, but you also got to come to terms with the one thing that is the most important thing to the communities is that fair allocation of funds. That's what the school funding formula was all about. We found that communities from Providence to Cumberland, from Lincoln to Woonsocket, to Westerly to Barrington, we're getting shortchanged on that funding.
It wasn't. There was no conversation about this in the governor's race specifically, and so this might be some open territory for you. But you might have a clean slate to actually be able to, because I think it fits into your municipal thing to be able to talk about that as something worthwhile to take.
Well, equity is really...
I just wish people were more upset about the car taxes. We seem to have a thank you, sir, may have another attitude about it. We seem so beaten down by it that we're not putting the pressure on you to come up with a solution.
A community like Coventry, because it's at a rate similar to Cumberland, over the phase-out time frame of the money coming from the state into their community, lost $20 million in terms of comparison to what a fair allocation of that fund would have been over the term of that funding, including taxpayers in Cumberland. So getting the valuation right, getting the rate right, but giving the flexibility to the communities to decide their own destiny, how they want to deal with the shortfalls that would come in, and everybody being honest about it, and not say that, like Governor Carcieri did, or General Assembly members at certain points in time, that the communities rose taxes because they lost money from the state's budget. That's not fair. That's not right.
One of the first things you've done without even being in office is talk about the PUC and our utility rates, and we'll talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. So one of the first things that the Lieutenant Governor-elect is having a conversation about is the rates for National Grid. Here's a headline that you might have seen the other day. Everyone kind of went, what? They're looking for a 23% rate increase, and you say what about that?
Well, and, what I say is the Lieutenant Governor gets to weigh on small business. So I made a promise that I would do what I did for education for small business in the state of Rhode Island and be the absolute #1 advocate that any small business person can find. The effective rate actually for small business is 30% increase. That's the first thing. So what we did was similar in Cumberland, where I hired an attorney, Mike McElroy, who's representing us in this case. And defended us against water rate increases where Pawtucket Water wanted to charge you a different rate than another customer in another community. We won that. Saved the town of Cumberland ratepayers $300,000 a year, every year. So this time we've intervened, and we basically have said, look, that spike is going to hurt small businesses. So it hasn't been handled that way, the spikes, for instance, in New York. Last year in New York, they had a big spike, and they negotiated, so they basically had a neutral or a very small increase. And they have the ability to do that. The PUC has the ability to do that. And the biggest issue, Dan, is the procurement. If I could just tell a real quick analogy.
Yeah.
You're sitting in a coffee shop, and this costs you $5 for the coffee. It's raining outside, but you could walk across the street without an umbrella and buy another cup of coffee for $2. But you know that no matter where you buy it, the cost of that cup of coffee is covered. That's what's happened in terms of this pass-through argument about the National Grid. They have secured these futures at a certain rate, but they're not incentivized to buy it at the best rate. So they need to restructure the way they buy and protect futures into the market. We've done that on a very small scale in our oil business, where we procure, we buy in advance, we lock in prices, and then we buy downside protection just in case the bottom falls out of the market, which it has. And so we think that there's an argument here that's going to give some very good relief, but it's going to change the way that the grid buys its futures and buys into the market to protect the ratepayers. Not only the small business people will take advantage of that, but also the residential customers.
So what's the action plan at the PUC?
We are at a hearing on December 16th. We've hired Mike McElroy. I've hired him in advance of being Lieutenant Governor. We've hired an expert witness, which you need in those hearings, and we're going to lay out the argument that there's 3 things that need to be done, which I've just talked about 2 of them.
Are you making a formal complaint?
We are now an official intervener.
Who's we?
I am intervening
as an individual, or
as
Lieutenant Governor-elect,
as a mayor, as a small business person, and as Lieutenant Governor-elect as being the main standing. That's how we filed. So the filing is done on behalf of Dan McKee, but just like I'll be in the Lieutenant Governor's office, it'll be for the small business community.
All right. Well, it'll be good to see the play-by-play. I think people will enjoy having that. That was kind of a shocker. Speaking of being elect, you're only weeks away from being sworn in. Had any conversations with the new governor-elect about how you guys are going to work together?
I've spoken to Gina, and I've spoken to staff there, and I expect that we will be able to carve out some things that I'll be able to help out the state in conjunction with the governor's office.
It seems to me you're the kind of guy that wants some running room. You're going to ask for running room on specific areas, the municipal side, the regionalization side, the fighting the PDC
regionalization.
side.
It's going to be very consistent with what we talked about in the campaign, which is refreshing, isn't it? So that it's going to be about the consolidation, regionalization. It's going to be about helping small business community. It'll be interesting to see what the governor does on the health exchange issue, whether that stays in his executive office or in the lieutenant governor's office, or that moves with Liz. It may move with Liz. I have no reason to understand either way. But
you're hiring your former chief of police and the head of the DMV. We have a little headline from the Valley Breeze, I think. A good man, Tony Silva. He's pretty high-powered. I'm sure there's a lot of people wondering why such a competent, high-powered guy in the lieutenant governor's office.
I promised I'd hire the very, very best people I could find.
But what's your charge for him?
Well, Tony's going to be emergency management. I said I was going to hire someone that has a really strong background in emergency management. Tony does. And he's going to be charged initially with a very simple one. Are we going to be able to regionalize and consolidate public safety dispatching so that we can take a step in to regionalization and consolidation in other ways. So it's going to be very measurable. Just like the small business issue, I'll say what I'm going to do on the small business. I'm going to take one of the full-time employees, I'm going to carve it out to about 5 different spots, and I'm going to have a revolving board of executives and business people in the country, in the state and the country, that are going to come in and they're going to be charged with one issue. I'm going to have like 6-month, 12-month, 18-month type terms, and then I'm going to charge them with one thing. Get us out of last place in business friendliness, and it's going to be very measurable. And so I'll be measured on the results from that.
Well, as you make progress, stay in touch with us.
Okay.
Sounds fun. Hey, it's new life every time we elect some new people. Final word and we come back. Stay with us. We've had some stories on grand juries nationally here the last couple of weeks, huh? Well, you're going to learn how a grand jury works with our guest tomorrow. The law professor from Roger Williams, Andrew Horowitz, will be my guest. And so make an appointment tomorrow night at 7:30. We'll see you on the radio at noon, too, on WPRO.